This is part 2 of my Stormlight Archive recap, starting with The Way of Kings, and in this video we're going to go through part 1. So 5 years after the events of the prologue, we meet a new character named Kaladin. Kaladin is a Dark Eyes squad leader fighting in Amaram's army, and as a refresher, Dark Eyes in Alethi society are like the bottom rungs of society, and Light Eyes are like the elites and the lords and ladies. Now, we learn that Kaladin is referred to as Kaladin Stormblessed by the people who fight in his squad and those around him, just because he is something special. Like, he is a badass skill wise and discipline wise, but also he just seems to be lucky, and by extension, his squad. His squad dies a lot less compared to other squads in this army, and he is pushing them not only to survive but also to excel in the army because he wants his squad to be transferred to the Shattered Plains. The Shattered Plains are where the real battle's happening, where, the real soldiers with real discipline are skirmishing with the Parshendi after the events of the prologue. Now, to keep it succinct, Kaladin does make it to the Shattered Plains, but not in the way any of us would be expecting. It turns out that at the end of this scene where he's fighting in Amram's army, he succeeds in killing a Light Eyes officer, which would be his ticket, to glory. But something happens because in the next chapter we see him, it's 8 months later, and he's now a slave. We don't know why he's a slave. The other slaves want to know too, so they ask him, and we get a little hint because he says, he's there because he killed a Light Eyes, and they're like, "Oh wow, people, usually just put to death for that kind of thing." And he says it's not the Light Eyes that he killed; it's the one that he didn't that landed him where he is. So that's a little mystery for us to solve later. We also see that the Kaladin we know now is a much different person from the Kaladin we first met. He is no longer Storm Blessed, he is now Kaladin Storm Depressed, and you can't blame him because it sounds like for the past 8 months he's made 10 escape attempts, and with each of those, the people he tried to bring with him have mostly been killed. And he himself, of the attempts that were successful, he was just, brought right back into slavery because you can't really hide as a slave with the brand that they put on your forehead. He has a glyph that says slave on his forehead. And most recently, he has another one that is a Shash brand that means dangerous. So he's a marked man, and he, at this point, does not have much hope or much spark left in him. Now, while he's in this slave cart, we do get little bits of his past. We learn that he does have a background in healing. His father was a surgeon, and he would assist his father, and he was being trained up to be a healer himself. We also learn that he knows how to read glyphs, which is not normal for Dark Eyes, but also for men. In this society, women do the reading, men do not. We meet our favorite Windspren during this time, Syl. She doesn't quite have her name yet, but she begins talking to Kaladin. At first, he thought she was just a regular Windspren flitting around who, just had been kind of showing up over the past few months. Then she takes on the form of like a human woman, and she asks him, why don't you cry? Like all these other slaves are crying, and it's sad, but we just see how, down he is and how much hope he does not have anymore. And still, over these chapters where he's being transported starts to become more and more like sentient. Now, I wanted to share this little tidbit of lore from a flashback of Kaladin with his father. And Kaladin speaks of, why do I have to wash my hands? And his father says it's knowledge passed down from the heralds. That the heralds were sent to teach mankind. They led us against the Voidbringers after we were cast from heaven. The Radiants were the orders of knights they founded. And Kaladin says, who were demons. And his father says, who betrayed us once the heralds left. They were not demons, they're just men who had too much power and not enough sense. So it's interesting to see what the current, belief is about the heralds and the Radiants, after what we read in the prelude. So, like I said, Kaladin does make it to the Shattered Plains. He and the other slaves in the caravan are, sold off, except Kaladin, nobody really wants a slave that has like the danger brand on his forehead. So he gets thrown to like the shittiest end of the shittiest stick, which is the bridge crews, and more specifically, Bridge 4. So we learned that the bridge crews are literally soldiers that pick up and carry giant bridges across the Shattered Plains. They bridge the gaps between the chasms, and the soldiers will run over. The bridgemen pick the bridge back up and run ahead again. And when they come to, where the fighting is happening, and the Parshendi loose their arrows on the Alethi army, it's the bridgemen who take the brunt of that force. Now, Kaladin is not eased into this at all. He immediately gets off to the wrong foot with a character named Gaz, who is like the officer in this area. So he puts Kaladin on this bridge 4 run at the back of the bridge, aka the worst vantage point. And we learn that Bridge 4 has a notorious reputation for dying the most. 23, I think, out of the 25 people holding that bridge die on this run. So, low level soldiers have to help carry the bridge back. And so you can see how none of this is helping Kaladin's mood. Things actually get so bad, so dismal, that even Syl can't stand to see him like this anymore. She says she's going to go. Um, we don't know where, we don't know what she's doing, but Kaladin is just left alone after that. And after seeing more people die on these bridge runs and more hopelessness, he decides to go somewhere called the Honor Chasm, which is where bridgemen go to jump. It's like the only choice that they can really have in this army. So, he tells Gaz that's where he's going. Gaz doesn't, he's like, all right, have fun. Just leave your vest in your shoes. And just before Kaladin jumps, Syl does show back up. And it's just the irony of this moment. So I didn't mention it before, but when Kaladin was in the slave wagon, they do get let out, to use a bathroom and walk around a little bit. He had picked some leaves that he knew were poison, from his background in medicinal education. And he kept them. And he was going to use them, as a contingency on himself or to try and, poison a slaver. But he had lost the leaves on the way. And when Syl returns, she's carrying something. She's like, oh, it's so heavy. And it's just one of these leaves. And it's like, Kaladin's about to take his own life, and she's handing him something that would do the same thing. And she's like, oh, I thought you would be happy to see it. And it's just, how could he still do it, And she tells him, too. She says, why don't you try one more time? Like, these bridgemen, they're going to die anyway. Like, there's no pressure on him. And she gets through to him. He does decide that he's not going to jump. He's going to try one more time. So he comes back to camp, and Gaz is basically like, what the fuck? And Kaladin tells him, no, I did die in that chasm, and now you're dealing with my vengeful spirit. And he basically tells Gaz to get the hell out of his way. He's going to be squad leader of Bridge 4, and he also bribes Gaz with a fifth of his money every week to just let him cook. And that's where part 1 ends with Kaladin's POV. He has a little bit of his spark back, and we're hoping that things are going to look better for him, but we'll see. Now, in part 1, we also have Shallan's POV, the female main character of this part, and I'm going to go into her journey in the next video.